December 17, 1943. The village of Demeshkovo, south of Pskov, Russia. Senior Sergeant Pavel Chernyshenko gunned his T-34 medium tank through the frozen marshland, 32 tons of Soviet steel crushing through ice and snow toward the German defensive lines. Behind him, loader Ivan Sokolov crammed another 76mm shell into the breech of their main gun. They had no idea they were driving into 13 days of hell that would test the limits of human endurance and prove that sometimes courage matters more than ammunition. What started as a routine assault would become one of the most extraordinary tank battles in military history, a story of two men who fought an entire German regiment with nothing but determination, grenades, and a single submachine gun after their last shell was fired. This is the story of the T-34 that wouldn't surrender, and the crew who proved that the most powerful weapon in any tank is the fighting spirit of the men inside it. The T-34 medium tank was the backbone of the Red Army's armored forces, a 32-ton steel monster that had shocked the Wehrmacht when it first appeared in 1941. Armed with a powerful 76.2mm gun and protected by revolutionary sloped armor, the T-34 could outfight any German tank of its class. But by December 1943, the war had entered its most brutal phase. The Germans had learned to counter Soviet armor with improved weapons and tactics, turning every battlefield into a killing ground where survival measured in hours, not days. Pavel Chernyshenko was a veteran tank commander who had fought his way from the suburbs of Moscow to the gates of Germany. At 26, he had already survived more tank battles than most crews would see in a lifetime. His loader, 19-year-old Ivan Sokolov, was a farm boy from Ukraine who could reload their 76mm gun faster than any loader in their regiment. Their T-34 model 1943 was battle-scarred but reliable, equipped with the improved hexagonal turret and upgraded transmission that made it one of the finest tanks in the world. They had named her Revenge after losing their previous tank to a German Tiger at Kursk. December 17, 1943, marked the beginning of Operation Star, the Soviet Third Shock Army's offensive to clear German forces from the strategically vital Neville region. The village of Demeshkovo sat at the center of a powerful German defensive network, anchored on Hill 184.2 and protected by 3 lines of trenches, concealed anti-tank guns, and elements of the 502nd German Tank Battalion. The Soviet plan was simple: smash through German defenses with massed tank attacks, then exploit the breakthrough with infantry and cavalry. Chernyshenko's T-34 was part of the leading wave, tasked with destroying German strongpoints and clearing the way for follow-up forces. At dawn on December 17th, the attack began. Soviet artillery hammered German positions for 30 minutes, then lifted fire as the tanks rolled forward. Chernyshenko pushed Revenge through the smoke and snow, Sokolov feeding shells into the gun as fast as he could load them. The first German defensive line crumbled under the assault. T-34s punched through anti-tank obstacles and overran machine gun nests, their 76mm guns destroying everything in their path. For a moment, it looked like the breakthrough was succeeding. Then the Germans counterattacked. Concealed anti-tank guns opened fire from camouflaged positions. German infantry emerged from hidden bunkers with Panzerfausts and magnetic mines. Within minutes, the Soviet advance ground to a halt as T-34 after T-34 erupted in flames. Chernyshenko found himself cut off from the rest of his battalion, surrounded by German forces in a frozen swamp north of Demeshkovo. His radio was dead, his supporting infantry had been driven back, and German shells were landing all around his tank. But Revenge was still fighting. Her engine ran smoothly, her gun was operational, and Chernyshenko had a full load of ammunition. He made a decision that would define the next 13 days. They would hold their position and fight. The first German assault came at noon. A full company of infantry, supported by anti-tank guns, advanced across the open ground toward the lone T-34. Chernyshenko waited until they were within 300 meters, then opened fire. The 76mm gun spoke with devastating effect. High explosive shells burst among the advancing Germans, cutting down entire squads and sending the survivors diving for cover. When the infantry tried to flank the tank, Sokolov raked them with machine gun fire from the hull-mounted weapon. By evening, the first attack had been repulsed. Dead Germans littered the approaches to the T-34's position, and the survivors had withdrawn to plan their next assault. Chernyshenko and Sokolov settled in for a long night, knowing the battle was just beginning. The swamp that had trapped their tank now became their salvation. The frozen marsh protected revenge from flanking attacks and absorbed the impact of German artillery shells. Snow and ice camouflaged the tank's hull, making it difficult for German gunners to get precise aim. But the isolation was complete. There was no possibility of retreat, no chance of resupply, and no communication with Soviet forces. They had only what was in the tank: 40 rounds for the main gun, 2,000 rounds for the machine guns, a few cans of stew, some crackers, and a little water. Day after day, the Germans attacked, sometimes in company strength with artillery support, sometimes in small groups trying to get close enough to place demolition charges. Each attack was met with precise gunfire from the T-34's weapons, each assault beaten back with mounting German casualties. Chernyshenko proved to be a master tactician. He varied his firing positions, moving the tank slightly each night to confuse German observers. He conserved ammunition by waiting for perfect shots, making every shell count. When German infantry got too close, he used the tank's weight as a weapon, crushing attackers under his tracks. Sokolov showed remarkable courage for someone so young. He not only handled the main gun ammunition but also operated the bow machine gun, repaired damage to the tank systems, and helped navigate their steel fortress through the marsh. His quick reflexes and steady nerves saved their lives repeatedly. The psychological effect on German morale was devastating. Here was a single enemy tank that had fought off an entire regiment for over a week. German soldiers began referring to the position as the haunted swamp, convinced that the tank crew must be supernatural to have survived so long. But human endurance has limits. By December 25th, Chernyshenko and Sokolov were running critically low on ammunition. They had rationed their food and water carefully, but 8 days of constant combat had exhausted their supplies. Worse, they were both wounded from shell fragments that had penetrated the tank's armor. On December 29th, the unthinkable happened. They fired their last 76mm shell. For most tank crews, this would have meant surrender or death. Without their main gun, a T-34 was just an expensive pillbox waiting to be destroyed. But Chernyshenko and Sokolov had come too far to quit now. They still had machine gun ammunition, a few hand grenades, and a single submachine gun. More importantly, they had 13 days of bitter experience and an unshakable determination to keep fighting. The final German assault came on December 30th. Convinced that the silent main gun meant the tank was finally defeated, German infantry advanced in overwhelming numbers. They expected to find either a destroyed tank or a crew ready to surrender. Instead, they met a hurricane of machine gun fire. Sokolov worked the bow gun while Chernyshenko fired through the commander's cupola with his submachine gun. When Germans got too close, they threw hand grenades from the open hatches, turning their tank into a giant bunker. The fighting was desperate and personal. Germans climbed onto the tank only to be shot down at point-blank range. Chernyshenko used his last grenade to destroy a German engineer team trying to place demolition charges. When the submachine gun ran out of ammunition, he drew his pistol and continued fighting. The battle raged for hours. German officers threw in reserves, determined to finally eliminate the lone tank that had become a symbol of Soviet resistance. But every assault broke against the T-34's armor and the incredible courage of its crew. As the sun set on December 30th, the 13th day of their siege, Chernyshenko and Sokolov prepared for their final stand. They had no ammunition left except for their sidearms and one last grenade that Chernyshenko had saved for himself rather than allow capture. Then they heard it, the rumble of tank engines approaching from the east. Soviet forces had finally broken through German lines and were advancing toward Demeshkovo. The relief they had waited for so long was finally arriving. At dawn on December 31st, elements of the Soviet Third Shock Army reached the swamp where a single T-34 had held off an entire German regiment for 13 days. They found Chernyshenko and Sokolov still at their posts, wounded and exhausted, but undefeated. The area around their tank was littered with German dead. Conservative estimates suggested they had killed over 150 enemy soldiers and wounded hundreds more. An entire German regiment had been tied down for nearly 2 weeks by 2 men and their tank. But the real victory was not measured in casualties. For 13 days, revenge had been a beacon of hope for every Soviet soldier fighting in the region. Radio reports of the tank's resistance had spread throughout the Third Shock Army, inspiring other units to greater efforts and proving that individual courage could make a difference even in the vast battles of the Eastern Front. Pavel Chernyshenko and Ivan Sokolov were both awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest decoration their country could bestow. Their T-34 Revenge was restored and sent to a museum in Moscow, where it stands today as a monument to the men who proved that the human spirit is the most powerful weapon of all. The story of the T-34 that fought for 13 days without ammunition became legend throughout the Red Army. It represented everything that made Soviet tank crews so formidable: technical skill, tactical innovation, and an absolute refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. But perhaps more importantly, it demonstrated the unique bond between a tank crew and their machine. In those 13 days, Chernyshenko, Sokolov, and Revenge became something more than the sum of their parts. They became a symbol of resistance that no amount of German firepower could destroy. Today, military historians study the Battle of Demeshkovo as an example of how determination and tactical skill can overcome material disadvantages. The fact that 2 men in a single tank could tie down an entire regiment for nearly 2 weeks is testament to the power of individual excellence in warfare. The T-34 was more than just the most produced tank of World War II. It was a weapon that embodied the fighting spirit of the nation that built it. And in that frozen swamp outside Demeshkovo, that spirit proved stronger than any armor and more powerful than any gun. Chernyshenko and Sokolov had shown the world that sometimes the most important ammunition a tank crew can carry is the courage to keep fighting when all hope seems lost. Their 13-day battle proved that as long as there are soldiers willing to fight, no position is truly hopeless and no cause is ever lost.